My name is Nancy Everhart. I'm a member of the board of the Association of Vermont Conservation Commissions. AVCC is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to support Vermont's conservation commissions in the state. We were founded in 1990, and we're a membership organization. We're supported by individuals and conservation commission memberships. We host an annual summit every year, and this year, as you can imagine, we had to really think long and hard about how to do that. We think we all have recognized the work of conservation commissions has become all the more important during this time when we're living through a pandemic, and we're challenged to stay safe, stay home, and still figure out how to stay connected and engaged while maintaining a distance.
I forgot I had a webinar.
And so this year, our theme of this virtual summit is conservation in the time of COVID-19. And so each session is exploring ways in which our collective conservation work has been impacted by and is relevant to the pandemic that we're all living through. And you can see on the screen in front of you the two sessions we've already had, the one we're at now and the two upcoming. So our topic today, which I'm really excited about, is perspectives on land access, equity, and conservation. What role can conservation commissions play? And in just a minute, Stephanie's going to introduce our three speakers. Just a few housekeeping things. I want to remind you, Stephanie mentioned we're being recorded. We are going to also ask people to stay on mute. We'll do our best to have time for questions at the end. We also encourage you to use the chat function for questions. And here you can see on the slide reminders of where your mute button and your video is. And we're asking people to, for the most part, keep your video off just during the presentations. And when we have time for questions, feel free to turn it on. And you can see here the chat function as well. I definitely also want to thank our sponsors. So Stephanie, if you can put that slide back up. We're really delighted to have, as you can see, a great list of sponsors. I particularly want to call out Front Porch Forum, the Lintelak Foundation, the Nature Conservancy in Vermont, Vermont Land Trust, and the Vermont Natural Resources Council, in addition to the others that are listed there. So thank you all so much for making this possible. I think that's about it. Stephanie, want to get right into your introduction of you can see here our next couple sessions coming up, and you can still register for those if you go to our website. November 4th, Agriculture and Clean Water, and our keynote, Paul Costello will be giving that in the evening of November 11th. All right, Stephanie, back to you.
Okay, thanks everyone. So I was hoping to have that slide last a little longer, but I can't do too many things at once. So here you're just seeing my face. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm honored to introduce our panelists in their order of appearance. Before I do, I just want to start off by saying we're going to be using the term BIPOC a lot this afternoon. And for those who don't know, that acronym stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. First, we're going to hear from Olivia Peña. Liv is the founder of the Vermont Releaf Collective, whose mission is to grow and support a network of BIPOC Vermonters involved in food systems, agriculture, land, and environmental initiatives. The collective does this by amplifying BIPOC voices and experiences, sharing a platform to develop a shared community, and advocating for opportunities for their success in Vermont and beyond. Next, we'll hear from Chief Donald Stevens. Chief Stevens leads the Nulhegan band of the Coosuk Abenaki Nation of Vermont. He recently led the fight to obtain legal recognition for the Abenaki people in Vermont and acquired tribal land for the Nulhegan tribe that has been absent for over 200 years before he did this. Among the many projects he is working on behalf of his people is a nonprofit, Abenaki Helping Abenaki, which helps support sustainable and green living through permaculture, organic gardening, and more. Don is an award-winning leader, businessman, writer, and lecturer, and he is also an IT professional on top of all that. Finally, we'll hear from Kenny Lazuli, who homesteads with her family on 125 acres in Corinth, Vermont, where she has hosted artist residencies for BIPOC artists from all over the place. She is a co-founder of a new organization as well called the Radical Imagination Project, which makes space for BIPOC artists to commune with one another and the land. Their current projects consist of an artist residency, land trust, and a series of really interesting events. So thank you all for being here. And now I will turn things over to Liv Peña.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time
to join this discussion today. It's really exciting to be able to share with you all. So I'm going to share my screen for a brief presentation. So are you looking at the land access and racial
Yes,
equity?
we can see it.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so to start again, my name is Liv Peña. I am the founder and one of the organizers of the Vermont Releaf Collective. And today I'll be talking about land access and how that relates to racial equity. So to start, this lovely background here is some farmland or land really that I've been very casually looking at. And when I say very casually, I mean during lunch, going on to realtor.com and seeing the current land that's available. So this is 11 acres in Charlotte, walking distance to the lake that I've been dreaming of. And you know, potentially not much more than that in the near future, but also just a beautiful background. Okay, so to start, I want to take a moment to make a land acknowledgement of what we know as present-day Vermont. So here,
Abenaki leader, would you want to listen in or?
Yeah. Oh, please be sure to mute yourself. Thank you.
So what we know today as Vermont is unceded ancestral territory of the Abenaki. So the Abenaki people are the original stewards of this land and have been for over 10,000 years. So, you know, it's really important that at the very least, we acknowledge that we are existing on these traditional Abenaki lands, but more so, I ask that you all join me in committing to honoring and respecting these relationships that our Abenaki neighbors have had with their native lands, and recognizing the ways that colonialism impact their native lands and the Abenaki community. And so please join me in committing to disrupting, or firstly learning about, as well as disrupting the ways that colonialism continue to impact and cause harm, both to the Abenaki community as well as the land. And so this may be familiar for some folks or maybe new, but there is a resource online called native-land.ca that shows a rough sketch of Native Indigenous ancestral lands. And so this is a really cool resource, and I can send it in the chat as well, if I can find the chat.
No worries, I'm happy to send it for you.
Thanks. And so this is a really neat map that shows who are the original stewards of the land that you're on. And so it's important to consider that Indigenous tribes did not have really concrete boundaries and often shared land, or you know, there were a variety of different tribes or confederacies that exist on land. And so for this, I wanted to show that what is currently Vermont is, again, existing on Abenaki land, and would encourage you all to learn about other places that might be important to you, and the ancestral lands and who that ancestral land is really, really lived there first. Okay, so we're gonna start jumping in with an imagination exercise. So to start, I want you all to think about an ideal Vermont day. Think about, you know, whatever season that is. For some of us, that might be summer. I personally love fall. Maybe you're a winter sport person, or you really just like snow. So think about that ideal Vermont day. And now add a farm to that backdrop. So really picturesque Vermont farm. You know, add a barn, maybe it's red, maybe it's hot pink, whatever color. And so if you're imagining this barn, now imagine a farmer walking out of this barn. What does that farmer look like? Probably the farmer that you're imagining does not look like me, a Black and brown young woman in Vermont. So certainly, you know, I wouldn't, oh, skip the slide. I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but the Vermont Relief Collective, which is the organization that I'm a part of, we are aimed to change the idea of who is involved in agriculture, land, food, and environmental work in Vermont. And so, so we're really trying to change the narrative and change the story and really show our presence. Also, quick disclaimer, I'm actually not a farmer. So, you know, I thank you if you did picture me, but I'm not a farmer. I hope to farm someday. But certainly one of those big pieces of being able to do so is accessing land and working past the barriers to access land. And so we're going to talk about some of the barriers to accessing land as people of color, and you know, what even does racial equity have to do with land access, as well as the opportunities that are available for you all in your different roles to support land access. And so to start, again, Stephanie mentioned this earlier, but a term that I'm going to be using a lot is BIPOC, and BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. So this chart here is showing the current racial demographics and makeup of Vermont. This is from the census, and the data is focused on July 2019. And so in terms of integrating racial equity into the land access and conservation work that you do, I would highly encourage centering BIPOC folks in the conversation. Instead of focusing on, oh, Vermont is so white, or, oh, well, you know, most farmers are just white people. You know, certainly we'll see what those racial demographics look like in terms of farming and land. But I would really encourage you to flip that narrative and the way that you're approaching the way that you think about racial equity and racial makeup of farming, to think about BIPOC folks. And so again, this is a quick snapshot, and we're going to use this for the next few slides to think about how there are disparities right now in land access and why. So again, in this chart here, this is the number of farms and producers, how they identify by race in Vermont. We're using the census data that we looked at earlier about the current population of Vermont and comparing that to the percent of farms that have producers who identify by race. So while there are while 1.4% of the population of Vermont are folks who identify as Black or African American, only 0.2%. So 0.2%, that's not even 0.2, it's 0.2% of farms have a producer who identifies as Black or African American. And so you'll see that there are great disparities between the way that racial demographics are made up in Vermont, as well compared to those who are currently farming. And so this is even similar, this is even more extreme when you look at land in farmland in Vermont. Excuse me. So you'll note that, again, starting at the top with folks who are Black or African American, again, 1.4% of the Vermont population, and the percent of land in farms where there is a producer that identify as Black or African American is 0.3%. So you'll note that there's just great disparities between the population of folks in Vermont compared to the land, the farmland, in acres. And so for this last chart, this is representing here, comparing the percent of farm producers by race and by farm size. So this chart here at the top starts with the smallest farmland all the way to, or smallest amount of farmland to larger farms, speaking on an acreage basis. And so I just want to note that this chart is greatly reduced. And so this is on a 100, this is a percentage based on percentages. So, you know, this goes up to 100%. And so I had to zoom in 10 times so that we could see the differences by race. And so this only goes up to 10%. And so you'll note that this turquoise bar that represents farms and farm size by white producers continues 10 times 10 times the amount of this chart. And so basically this is representing that as farm size increases, there's a decrease of who is farming that land in terms of by race. And so just want to recognize that census data is not perfect, and there are certainly some challenges associated with using census data, such as lack of responsive, such as like response, level of responses, and who is, you know, participating in such. But it's clear here that the numbers are incredibly low of BIPOC folks who are accessing and farming land. And so we're going to talk about why now. And so why are we thinking about racial equity in terms of land access? In particular, land and farming can be incredibly liberating ways to connect. And these are ancestral and deeply traditional practices for many communities of color. But at the same time, there's a lot of harm that has been perpetuated because of land theft, like through such as the Abenaki community, or harm done through agriculture to Black communities because of exploitation and slavery. And so today, there continue to be land access barriers experienced by communities of color. For example, the cost of farmland is a huge barrier. So many BIPOC folks rent and farm small acreages. And so accessing the you know, different resources that are available there are barriers including bias, financial barriers, language barriers, and cultural barriers. And so in terms of access to and qualifying for financial support, it's very well documented that BIPOC farmers, and especially Black farmers, may not always qualify for typical forms of agricultural credit. And there have been many lawsuits between Black farmers and the USDA because of disparities in support. The demographics of the Vermont service provision, and even those who are supporting land access, that landscape right now is incredibly white. And so there are different lived experiences between white folks and future and current BIPOC farmers and folks who are seeking to access land. But rest assured, there are great opportunities as well. And so those were only a handful of barriers. And as on a similar note, these are only a handful of opportunities. But some ways to promote land access include allocating grants and subsidies that are specifically geared towards BIPOC, as well as supports for BIPOC-led organizations and service providers to help our community access land. It's also incredibly important to ensure that there is equitable participation of BIPOC folks in all different kinds of decision-making roles related either directly or indirectly to land access. So whether it's on the Conservation Commission, the local land trust board, the staff leadership positions, it's important for BIPOC folks to be in all of those roles. It's also important to make sure that we are constantly identifying and promoting equitable ways to access land, both in traditional ways as well as new and innovative ways that are helping to meet the needs that are not currently met through mainstream methods. And then finally, it's incredibly important to make sure that service providers and land access support organizations are continuously deepening their capacity to support land access and enjoyment of land for BIPOC folks. So whether it's through anti-racist training and continuing to build that capacity and working on cultural competency and humility, all that is important to continue to strengthen the muscle to build the capacity. And so I'm gonna talk really briefly about the Vermont Releaf Collective. So this is an organization that we are a community-based, statewide, membership-based organization that was created by and for BIPOC folks in Vermont who are involved in land, environment, agriculture, and food systems. And so, yes, I do know that Releaf is not spelled as one might traditionally be familiar with Releaf, but Releaf stands for Racial Equity in Land, Environment, Agriculture, and Food Systems. And so those 4 points are our 4 focus areas. And so we kind of have 2 sides. The internal focus is on building our community and building a network of BIPOC folks who are involved in the focus areas, either through work, through study, through pleasure, whether someone is a full-time farmer or just, is homesteading or farmsteading, whether they are a student studying, water quality or, doing dairy research, or they are, just like looking at cows, like all of that, there's room for everyone in Releaf. And so we're focused on building relationships all across the state within our community, sharing skills and offering opportunities for collaborating between different projects. And then our external focused piece is amplifying our presence in the 4 focus areas. So as I was alluding to in the beginning, we really want to make sure that folks recognize that we are present in these sectors and in these spaces, and that BIPOC folks are doing really incredible things across the state. And so I'm gonna finish up with 2 pictures. The one on the left is my dad and I fishing when I was younger, and on the right, it's my brother reading outside. And so one of the most important parts about land access and promoting racial equity in land access is affirming that BIPOC folks are, have the same and fair and equitable opportunities to get outside and enjoy being outside and being on the land and connecting with the land in the ways that we want to, and can do so safely, and enjoy being outside and on the land. So thanks so much. And I will now pass it on to Chief Stevens, I believe. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you so much, Liv, for that presentation.
Hi, Kwei. Don Stevens. I'm Chief of the Nulhegan Abenaki tribe. So I appreciate being invited to speak with you. I could speak about this topic probably in great length, but since we have limited time, I'll give you an overview of some of the things we're doing. And if people want to contact me at a later date, they're more than welcome to. We are a place-based people. So the land and ourselves are indistinguishable. Like Nulhegan means place of the wooden traps. And Coosuk means pines, and Abenaki means the first light of day. So Native people would have known us as people of the wooden fish traps who live in the pines, who see the first light of day. So Nulhegan Basin and Nulhegan River, all of those places are where we are, where we live. And we also are part of the greater Vermont community. We didn't look at land as ownership or dominion over. We looked at stewardship because since the Creator created the land and told us that if we provide for the land would provide for us, that we could not take it with us, and that we were to be stewards of it and work within the confines of something that was given to us as a means of survival. And because we had the ability to destroy things on the web of life outside of ourselves, that we had a certain responsibility to be the protectors and the stewards so we didn't detriment other life around us. Europeans came and had a different concept of ownership and dominion over, and tried to take as much as they could. And when they used up their resources, they continuously tried to acquire more. And that essentially removed us from our lands, which we could not be stewards any longer. So we had a different concept, even though we liked the ability to have something within our possession. It was only in our possession to steward it for as long as we could, to have it provide for us. That's an important concept, because that's some of the reasons why some of the treaties were signed, because people wanted to use the land as stewards, but the intention was to own it and remove us from it. So we do our best to recapture that. And some of the implicit bias around that was, even when we were recognized for as Abenaki people, they actually wrote in the bill that by recognizing us as an indigenous population, we did not have the rights to the land, which is inherently unfathomable. So we went about it a different way because we are a tribal government. So we said, how can we continue to use the lands that were assigned traditionally to our people? Like each people would get together and decide what part of the river you would live on or what part of the woods, so you didn't use up all the resources, and you would travel from place to place in order to replenish those resources in a sustainable manner. So we said, how do we honor the traditions of our ancestors to continue to gather medicine, food, materials to make our tools and artistry to be able to live, and without having to own a particular piece of property. So we got into the land access. Like I decided to work with partners to say, how do we access your lands without us owning them? Because that's what our ancestors traditionally did. So I started working with people like TransCanada. I started working with First Light and some of the hydroelectric dams that were relicensing, saying, if you want our input, then you should give us access to the land, because if people do land acknowledgements that this is unceded territory of Abenaki land, but they don't give us access to it, it's kind of hypocritical, right? You're saying, yeah, we know it's yours, but you can't have it. So it's how do you make people comfortable with allowing you access without losing control of what they have in their possession, right? So we worked with many organizations, including the Green Mountain National Forest, the Nulhegan Basin, many organizations to do licenses and permits. So if you go to our website, I think they displayed at AbenakiTribe.org, and go under partnerships, you can kind of see all of the work that I've done to give us land access in the state of Vermont. So I worked with the Agency of Natural Resources, so I have access to their lands. I have Fish and Wildlife accesses to all the wildlife management areas. I have access to all the state park and recs areas to be able to gather food, gather medicine, and gather in a traditional manner. So so that is how I've been working with towns, with individual landowners, with farmers, with others to how can you allow Abenaki access without worrying about the ownership piece. Don't get me wrong that we love to have land that's in our control, and we accomplished that, as you've probably seen write-ups, that we were able to obtain. Nulhegan was able to obtain land in over 200 years. You know, we have a tribal forest up in Barton, and we looked at that as if towns can have town forests, why can't Abenaki, who are their own government, have tribal forest? So we went out to prove that, and we worked with the Sierra Club and the Open Space Institute, the Vermont Land Trust, Community Foundation, and a bunch of others to actually purchase this piece of property. It's 68 acres that is ours. And we don't look at land as just land. We look at it as we have ancestors that walked in the same shoes that we were walking in and seen the same trees and plants and animals for thousands of years. So we are directly connected to those people who took care of the land, just like seeds, right? If somebody has a seed, somebody had to take care of it for thousands of years in order for you to hold it in your hand. And if any of them would have thrown it away and not been a good steward, we wouldn't have it to plant, right? Because it would be lost forever. So we look at that historical stewardship, and it is our responsibility to continue that stewardship. So I challenge the people on this call to work with our people to, at least at a minimum, give us access to the land to be able to continue our traditional ways of gathering and hunting and using the land. And if people want to like deed it to us or will it to us or protect their land forever, there's easements that we've worked with the land trust that allows us access forever, because easements follow the deed. So, I mean, there are many ways that you could support the Abenaki community. And we are also looking at other ways to do some farms. It didn't surprise me that it said we had 0.4%. I mean, that amount surprises me, but most of those people are farmers, 1 to 9 acres, because we considered ourselves connected to the land and growing our own food and crops. And if you have read in 7 Days or Vermont Day, I can't remember which, the food sovereignty program that I have, working with farmers in towns and communities to grow foods to give back to our people. And we also have an Abenaki Trails project that connects us to specific land-based places around the state of New Hampshire and Vermont where people can visit. That is important to us. So there's so many things that we could kind of discuss. But the important piece, and I think Olivia was stating this, is that we don't have a lot of funds and resources, and many Europeans have more resources. So it is awful hard for us to acquire land and be able to do those things to give us that equal access or the equity. And for us, it's the fact that we always had it to be stewards, and then we were just removed from that stewardship, which, you know, we're trying to find other ways to help with stewardship, even though it kind of left us like, if that's your home, if we're place-based people and we're removed from that place, you kind of lose yourself, right? You lose your identity. That's why we had to get at least one piece of property to give us that wholeness. And if we can't be stewards and we let the Creator down because he charges us with that stewardship and we can't have access to the lands to help these stewards, we find other ways. One of my citizens created a biochar company that we're working with, which to help clean up the waterways and clean up the lake, and those things are a way to continue to help farmers and others be stewards while protecting the environment and giving us a way to continue that mission. That makes sense. I know there's someone after me, so I probably won't take a lot more time unless people have questions at the end. So I'll probably turn it over, but please feel free to look at our website, look at all the things we're doing around land access and food sovereignty and working with places to identify. I just want to throw in that, as you know, the state of Vermont just passed a law to be able to name places in our language, like state parks, which is kind of allowing us that name place recognition. We also work with other places to create trails and name things like what an ash tree was, why it was used. And if you guys are doing conservation around, especially the towns, cutting down your ash trees, please work with us a little bit, because we have people that use those trees. I mean, they're not just in it, they're just not objects that are just there, and you're kind of doing the work of the ash borer by just cutting them down, especially when some of them can have immunity that might keep those that could survive. We have to manage these things in a way that makes sense, and instead of just looking at it as object and clear cutting stuff, because it impacts so much. So I just urge you to try to work with the community as we have time to kind of advise or at least partner. And that's all I can ask for, is that, and finding ways to help us regain our access to lands, whether it be owning it, giving it, or just access. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don. And I've put a lot of the links you mentioned in the chat. So if people have questions, just let me know. And I will now turn things over to Peña.
Hi, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Don and Olivia, for everything you said. It sort of is a very nice compliment for what I'm about to talk about. So I grew up in Corinth, Vermont, moved away for many years in search of a community that looked more like me and my family. And then I wound up back in Vermont because it's my home. And my partner and I have run an arts residency on the land in Vermont where we live for the past 4 years. This year we've transitioned to only hosting BIPOC artists and reserving the land where we live for BIPOC people. There are very few rural spaces that are reserved, as you've heard. And that feels really important to us. And since COVID came, we didn't have the opportunity to host anybody this year. So I started focusing my efforts on land access. And I've been meeting with several other organizations that care about this issue equally. And so the project that I'm working on, and the reason that I've been asked to speak today, is called Every Town. And the premise of Every Town is to create access for BIPOC people in every town in Vermont. So that's 250 towns, and that's a big project. Right now, I've teamed up with another organization, and we're starting to write policy for the state that would set this precedent. And part of the goal is to create a fund, a granting fund that would be available for any person of color to apply for a grant for purchasing land, paying off an existing mortgage, or business startup. So that's part of it. And then the other part of the fund, every town itself would be able to apply for grants to place the land in permanent ownership of a land trust, to place land in trust so that no person owns the land. The land would be kept in trust and matched with a citizen who is looking for either farmland or an apartment or whatever meets their needs. And then that property would be permanently owned by the land trust and be held with the easements that the land trust deems necessary for holding land in trust. They include conservation, they include regenerative practices, they include permanent access for BIPOC people. So when a person would be on one of those parcels of land that is being held by the land trust, and they were no longer wanting to be there, they would not be able to sell the land. The land is not for sale, but they would be able to sell their improvements. And anything they've built over time, any house that they lived in, would be able to be sold to another BIPOC person. This project has started to attract attention, and people are sort of curious how they can support it and how they can support this kind of work that we're doing. And as conservation commissions, I think supporting the work is one thing and supporting a project is another, and supporting the work is like the important part. And so like with easements, like Chief Stevens was saying, and like with donations of land, like Olivia was saying, those things are very important, but also just including BIPOC people in decision making and making sure that there are positions for them on all of these town government committees. I personally am on my planning commission, and it's not a fun job, but it's it's interesting work, and I think it's important for myself and my daughter that I'm there and I'm helping making these decisions for the future of our town and for our state. So, but I'm the only person of color on my entire town government. And one frustrating thing is that, so like people in Vermont like to say, oh, there aren't any Black people here. Oh, there aren't any Native people here. We're here. We're really here. There's a lot of us. I mean, yeah, percentage wise, not a lot of us, but there's enough of us here to be given a voice and to be given a seat at the table for these kind of conversations. And that feels like really mostly like the primary important thing is just like letting us have an opinion. Because we do, and we do want to be on land, and we do want to be in rural space. So those are like my most important points. And I know that we're sort of running out of time, so I want to give time for questions. And I didn't really say very much, but I will say like, so the projects that I'm working on personally involve creating safe space for BIPOC on rural land. And we do that through the arts residency. We do that through offering skill shares and workshops. We did a wilderness skills workshop for BIPOC people this fall, and it was incredible. It was a magical experience. And just like the ancestral knowledge that people were sharing from their own communities and their own families, and just like the way that it felt to be on land with a group of other BIPOC people who aren't usually able to be, we aren't usually able to gather in this way and just sit and share and be in nature. So that was really powerful. And we have a lot more programming coming up. I mean, but this is like a personal project, so I don't want to take up too much time with it, but I think that like, yeah, donating land, creating space, giving people a voice, and not harming the land are like my primary concerns and the primary work that I'm doing right now. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy to answer more questions, but I think that people probably have questions for Olivia and Chief Stevens as well.
Thank you so much, Kenya. I just want to jump in and ask if you'd be okay talking a little bit about the project near Hanover.
Oh yeah, yes. So so it's shifted a little bit. I've been working with the Vermont Land Trust, Vital Communities, the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, and I think that's it. So we're looking for a piece of land in the Norwich area. We had found a piece of land to start fundraising for, and this land would be used for a farm incubator for BIPOC farmers, like a learning farm, and also just like do I want to farm? Do I want to live in this climate? Sort of a safe space to figure those questions out for at least 3, potentially 5 groups of farmers. So the land ideally would have enough space for grazing, for growing vegetables, and then potentially like using the forest for growing mushrooms or like, agroforestry of some kind, all using regenerative practices. So we had found this piece of land and we went and looked at it, and it was a large piece of land, but it was the only open spaces were right up against the interstate. And I could not in good conscience agree to that, to using this space. Like Vermont is beautiful and vast, and there is land, and people are giving up land and donating land and offering land that is not right next to the interstate. And I feel like people of color are often placed in places that are undesirable and given things that other people don't want. And I did not want this to be another example of that. So I said no thank you to fundraising for, like almost $1 million to buy a piece of land right next to the interstate. So we just sort of put out a call to all of the networks of those nonprofits, just saying, like, if anybody knows of a piece of land or is interested in offering a piece of land, or like selling it at a reduced rate for easement, in exchange for easements, and we've sort of we've had a lot of people are interested, not a lot of people who have access to land or money. So I guess that would be something to put a call out if anybody knows of a piece of land that could be used in this way to educate and share space for BIPOC farmers. And also what comes with that is cultural respect easements, so that Native people can come onto the land and use the land whenever they want without restriction. And that goes for all of the land-based projects that I'm working on. But yeah, so that project is sort of it had a little momentum and then it sort of stalled out. And I think that that's how it goes with creating land access for BIPOC people. I think that it's the decision making about how to get the land, or how to be able to be on the land, is not up to us. It's up to people with money and with ancestral wealth and with the resources that our communities don't traditionally have. So yeah, I mean, that's another, I could go on and on and on about all of these different parts of this conversation. And I think that Olivia covered a lot of really important just general data about what's going on here specifically. And then Chief Stevens is offering sort of a light at the end of the tunnel, people are working towards this and there is room for this, and the state is willing to work with us in some ways. But I guess I just would encourage everyone to just further that work and support that work and connect with people who are doing the work. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are people doing this work. So that's, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that update on the project. And yeah, I think you're right that it demonstrates what's really at stake here, and how each of these things just takes longer because of so many barriers. And it's great for conservation commissions to be aware of that. Someone asked in the chat to describe the history of the word BIPOC. I would prefer the panelists focus on discussing topics that they came here to discuss, but I will post some resources in the chat. And I do quickly want to say that overall, the term recognizes that systemic racism continues to negatively affect the lives of Black and Indigenous people in ways that other people of color may not necessarily experience, which is why BIPOC is a term beyond POC, which stands for people of color. So thank you for that question. Does anyone else have any questions for our panelists?
While we're waiting for a question, I'd just like to mention that one thing we've noticed is that people fear things that they don't know or understand. And part of the reason I decided to go for access without complete ownership or easements was to make people feel comfortable that the world would not collapse if all of a sudden you gave us access to forage, gather, and hunt on people's land. Now, that is a great step, but it is a baby step, because agreements or licenses or permits can be given or taken away at any time, right? They're not set in stone, where easements are more permanent to follow the land with certain restrictions, but ownership means unhindered access to do what you need to do on those properties. So there's like a 3-step phase, and we approached it to give people who are comfortable with one of those options. They had options, and it wasn't like all or nothing. So obviously we always look for the most unhindered access and access forever. But I think different people have different comfort levels. And anyway, I just wanted to mention that just by having access doesn't guarantee our people anything long term. It's just a unless it's actually in law following the land, then it's just feel good, and it gives us what we need for now, but it can be taken away at any time. So I just wanted to state that.
I just want to sorry, if it's okay, I just want to add one thing. When we're talking about land access and creating access for BIPOC people and acquiring land and all of that, I think one of the common responses we get is people that are afraid that we're trying to take away their land. And I just want to be very clear that that's like not even in the realm of possibility. Also, it's like not our intention. Our intention is to access land that's not being farmed or not being used, and is in, like, there's, I don't know the number of acreage in this state, but I know that there is like a lot of land that is just sitting, and it's owned by people who own a lot of land and don't think about every corner and don't think about how other people could access that land. But the point is that we're looking for land that's not currently being actively used by someone else, and we're not interested in taking anyone's land.
Thank you for that. There are a few questions. One is, I'll just list them out and we'll go from there. One is, has there ever been any effort to explore a reparations program particularly for Indigenous people? And I assume focusing on Vermont. And the other question is, when a town advertises positions on town boards, how can the towns reach out to the BIPOC community specifically? As usually there are just 1 or 2 people who apply for these positions. And then Zach will follow up with a question on place naming if there's time. So I guess for the first reparations question, I will turn to Don and then to Kenya, because I know Kenya, you were involved in the reparations map, I believe.
I think originally we started out with apologies, like for our eugenics, for the sterilization program that Vermont conducted, the 1931 Sterilization Act, which affected our people, and we're obviously trying to sterilize our people here in Vermont. That's still in committee because of the COVID thing. It got kind of shelved. But I know there's a big push by the BIPOC community for reparations, I think around the slavery issue. And they are looking, the state is looking at maybe creating a reparations committee to see how they could do such things. But most people are afraid when you start talking reparations, they're afraid, what does that do to me? What does that mean to me? How is that going to affect us? And then people pull back and withdraw. So I don't think there's been any serious attempt at trying to provide, I want to say, equity to our people. And I don't want that to sound out there, but I'm just saying is that it's all about equity and giving us a hand up, not a handout. I mean, we like being proud people, and we just want access to what we had before. So anyway, I know that's that. And place names, I'll quickly say, we have linguists that work with, at least when it comes to naming places, we have linguists that can help with those things from an Abenaki standpoint. And we just named a new fish and wildlife management area in Lake Bomazine called Botswano. But Bomazine means firekeeper. So anyway, I'll stop talking there and let somebody else jump in.
Yeah, I'd love Kenya to weigh in on the reparations question, then for Liv to take the question about how towns can advertise to BIPOC community members and reach more diverse groups of people. You're muted, Kenya.
Sorry about that. I think what you're asking me to talk about is the reparations map that you just put a link to.
Yeah,
so the Northeast Farmers of Color have a reparations map on their website, or a link to a reparations map on their website, where BIPOC citizens and business owners and farmers can place their project on the map, and it gives access to other people. There's you can place your project on the map, and then if you're looking for something, or if you need funding to purchase land, or if you whatever it is your goal is, you can place that on the map, and it's a resource where if someone is looking to support BIPOC in farming or in business or existing, there's a direct link there and a way to get in touch with them, or a way to get in touch with Soulfire Farm, who actually I think sponsors that map. in order to support people. So that's like a specific way that if someone's looking to work towards reparations, you can go there. It's laid out very simply. I know that you asked Liv to address the other question, but I just want to say from my experience, because I grew up in the town I live in, when there was an opening on one of the panels, people approached me directly. More than one person approached me directly and said, hey, would you like to be on this panel, or would you like to be on this committee? Because I think you are underrepresented, or like, you know, people like you are underrepresented and it would be cool. So in that case, it was like neighbors looking out, but maybe Liv wants to expand on other ways to advertise that.
Yeah, so this is an important question, and I think that there is a little bit of a balance when approaching this question, because I think on one side, like sometimes it just feels a little bit tokenizing when someone's like, hey, this board is all white, or hey, this committee is all white, like, can you join so that we can be more diverse? Sometimes that just feels pretty tokenizing from personal experience. At the same time, it's important to recognize, like, when these are incredibly white spaces, and like, yes, there does need to be diversity, but beyond diversity, there needs to be equity in that participation. So if you are hoping to add more people of color to your commission or committee, make sure that it's being done intentionally. And so it is helpful, you know, to build relationships with BIPOC folks in your community, you know, just to be a good neighbor and a good community member, and just a good person. And as well, you know, make sure that there is intentionality around including BIPOC folks. And so in some spaces that I've participated in, when groups are like looking for intentional participation of BIPOC folks, they've often offered like stipends or some form of payment, especially recognizing that wanting to have the people of color in that space to provide a perspective or information that might not otherwise be there, that by paying us, then that's recognizing basically that we are contributing in a way that there was not that contribution before. Although at the same time, I'm recognizing that, especially for small towns, budgets are tight as well. So again, it's kind of that tricky balance, but I am just a strong advocate for compensating BIPOC folks for our contributions.
I'd like to jump in and say something because I have to leave in about a minute. And I do appreciate you saying that, Olivia, because there are many times where I have to do a lot of things for free, and it's not equitable compared to other people who can do this all the time. Like what I'm doing right now, I work for another position in a job, and I'm doing this during lunch, and they don't pay me to do native things. So it's good to be able to be on these panels. One thing I wanted to quickly say is be patient with Indigenous people. There are only so many of us. And if we had to serve on every board in every town, we just couldn't do it. We are a tribal government. That the only thing that sets us apart is that we have our own tribal government, and we act in our own manner. That if people want to do reparations or land access or other things, they can contact us directly or me. Not that we don't work with others, but if they want advice, we would rather do it in a collective way, because we can't serve on every board. If people can serve, great. But we don't have the type of resources to be able to serve on every board, or to be there in person to review every project. So it would be nice to reach out and just ask for our information, or to work with us, and then we'll do the best we can. But be patient with us, because we don't have as many people and resources as others do. And I think that's the same with other people of color or BIPOC. So thank you.
Thank you so much to all our panelists. And we did have, I know Chief Stevens has to go, and I will share, when I share the recording of this session, I will share his contact information as well as the others' contact information. And there was one seemingly rhetorical question that I guess we should end on, which is from Ned: to even imagine our future, we need to see ourselves together, sharing the land, living on the farm, living in the watershed, living on Earth. how can Black and Indigenous people help us see our world and future as inextricably linked? And it seems like there are indeed many ways, as long as we compensate them fairly and value their expertise and their opinions and their needs for the land here in Vermont and in general. So thank you again to all our presenters and to everyone for attending this panel today. And I will be sending around a recording tomorrow. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.